remember really, but I was working in Mount Isa, a mining town in Queensland, but I can't remember exactly what.
What were you doing between the Air Force?
I was a miner in Mount Isa, and I'd tried to join up before the war broke out, actually. I'd gone on a holiday down to Brisbane and tried to join the Air Force, and I got a nice letter saying that there was no room for me.
So how did you get in?
Well, as soon as the war broke out, I had already had these forms that I'd brought back with me, intending to apply again, and I sent them away, but they were peacetime forms, and they had to put a stamp on them to change them to a wartime call-up. And nothing happened for about 6 months, so I went down to Townsville to find out what happened. And they eventually found these, but they had so many recruits they didn't worry about mine and the heap that was with mine. And after they looked them up, I was in. I can always remember the recruiting officer asked me what I wanted to be in the Air Force. And I asked him what he had, and I said, well, I'll be a gunner. He said, why a gunner? And I said, well, I'll be a navigator. He said, why a navigator? I said, well, I'll be a pilot then. So that's what happened. I became a pilot.
And where did you train?
I trained in at Bradfield Park, the initial training. Then I went to Narrandera, flew Tiger Moths, and after 50 hours we were posted to Canada, and I flew on Ansons in Canada. And then I went to England and went to Scotland, Kinloss in Scotland, and flew Whitleys. And that's when I started operations on Whitleys in 1942, January.
You must have been one of the very early engines.
Well, there's quite a few in front of me, but I was fairly early.
How many trips did you do in Whitleys?
I only did 3.
That must have been actually at the end of their
It was. After the 3 trips, the squadron that I was on was sent away on Coastal Command with them, but quite a few of us, second pilots, we were kept in Bomber Command. And I finished up going back to Litchfield and getting a crew, or not going back to Litchfield, going to Litchfield the first time and getting a crew. But I was already a veteran of 6 trips as second pilot, and I did one, the first trip as a captain was 1,000 bomber raid on Cologne. And then I went to 460 Squadron and finished my first tour there.
Was that the 1,000 bomber trip was before you went to 460?
That's right. That's from OTU in a real old aircraft.
Or Wellington?
Wellington.
What do you remember about crewing up?
Well, when I went through my training, we didn't crew up. When at the Kinloss OTU, we just flew with anyone because they were training us as pilots, and the rest of the crew had been trained somewhere around the way as well. So you didn't get to know anyone. And when I went on to a squadron, second pilot, but that crew had nothing to do with you. We didn't know them very well. And then when I went back to Litchfield and collected this crew and came to the squadron, they only lasted a day. They went on trip that night with another pilot, much against their want and mine, and they were shot down. So I didn't have a crew for any length of time. From then on, it was all the odds and sods would fly with me. I was an odd bod, they were odd bods, navigators. I had many navigators, many pilot ops, many, until I finished my tour.
Well, this is at 460?
At 460. I never... Well, I'd have a navigator for a couple of trips, and he'd finish his tour or go get organised with someone else. And then I had one, Ron Friend. I suppose I had him for about 12 trips, but that'd be the most that I ever had anyone in that first tour. I finished up with about 30 or 40 different fellows flying me, and my logbook shows it on my first trip, tour.
Why do you think you survived?
I don't know. I always felt that it was going to happen to someone else, not to me. I had little doubts at times, but I never thought of it as that's going to be me that's going to be shot down. Even though I was scared the whole time, but I had that feeling in me anyhow that I didn't prepare for death like some fellas used to. Tidy up their rooms, put all their things away, keep everything in order, hand everything over to the adjutant, write letters home and have them all ready, then tear them up when they go back. Well, I never did anything like that. My room was always a mess. Things were laying around. I never wrote letters home, and just hoped for the best. I used to say some things that annoyed people too. During the first tour, when I'd have a few drinks, then I'd always say that the German wasn't built. Well, the German wasn't born to build a gun to shoot me down. And of course, some of them would say, well, I'm not going to find that fella anymore. But it was all bravado. Man was scared to hell, but you had to put a face on it. Because I think a lot of us, if we're true about it, we'd say that we're more scared of showing we're scared than being scared.
Was LMF something that we were pretty...
Well, no. I knew a couple of fellows that didn't want to fly anymore and refused to, but I was never that way, because I like the people to like me. I like my fellow men to think fairly high of me, and I think that would worry me if I ever showed it. There'd be times when I got very ill at one stage during the first tour, and I'd gone to the doctor, and all he'd asked me was, when I'd done the last trip, when I was going to do the next one, how many I'd done, as if that had anything to do with my feeling sick as a dog. So he told me to come back the next day, and I wouldn't go back. But the navigator told the CO, and the doctor came and saw me, and I had yellow jaundice, and I think within half an hour I was on the way to hospital. Well, that hurt my feelings, he doing that. Another time, I turned back with an aircraft that was, I said, uncontrollable. The flight commander the next morning had it tested, he said, and that there was nothing wrong with it, and I was to take it up and test it with a full bomb load on. Well, fortunately, before that, one of the airmen had leaned against the tailplane, and the whole thing had moved. It had been come out from servicing, and it hadn't been tightened up properly. And that flight commander never apologised to me, and I don't think I ever spoke to him ever again. But they were things that, you know, you were scared, but you didn't want to show it, or didn't want anyone to tell you that you were a dingo.
So what did being scared feel like? And when did it start?
Before you got in the aircraft. I think when you went out to the... I never worried. I don't know what other people felt like, but I didn't worry so much at the briefing. If it was a pretty bad target, you wouldn't feel too well about that. But when you got out to the aircraft and waiting around to take off, you forever wanted to go and relieve yourself. But there was nothing there to relieve, and it was always called the nervous pee. And I say that as any man in Bomber Command that ever got an aircraft to go overseas, to go over Germany, didn't have a nervous pee, there was something wrong with him. Once you got in the aircraft and got organised, things were better then. And the takeoff for me was never too good, because that was a bit of an itchy time, should an engine fail or anything like that. Then when you got in the air and you're busy climbing to height, took your mind off it again, and then you settled down to cruise to Germany, you started getting a bit worried again. And I always found that if you had the longer the trip was free and easy, the longer the trip went without any trouble, the more tension would be in you. But once the action started, especially if you've had a trip that they seemed to torment you the whole time, and I'd lose my temper, and then I felt good. I couldn't care bloody less then. And I can remember one time being forced down from about, I suppose, about 80 to 19,000. We were supposed to be out going over Germany, coming back in from Stettin, and I was forced down to about 10 or 9 or 10,000, and I couldn't have cared bloody less, because I'd had such a hell of a time. I was sweating and annoyed and mad and swearing and upsetting the crew and myself and everyone. But I think that offsets your nerves. When you settle down and on the way back again, then you get back to your right tension again.
When did the highs come?
Beg pardon?
When did the highs come? When you started to get good about it?
The only time you get good about it when you get out of the aircraft on the ground and you finish, and you're definitely right then. That's when you feel, I used to anyhow, feel like running around. Because there was always a nice time coming back over the channel, but there was always in your mind that the intruders could be around the place. You think of a trip like this, just a trip. See, everyone in Bomber Command would feel the same way about it, I should imagine, to do a trip over Germany. You set off, you can be tormented by flak and searchlights over all the defended areas. Anywhere along the line, they can get at you with, the night fighters can get at you. And we get over the target, there's the risk of collision and the risk of bombs falling, which happened to me. A load of incendiaries, or some incendiaries fell on me. And all the way back, you can be tormented by the fighters, even over your own aerodrome. And you do this for a stint of 5, 3, 4 hours, and you're sitting on a bloody platform loaded with about 7,000 tons of bombs and inflammable fuel, waiting for something awful to happen to you. And you get back and land, well, you know what the feeling is then. Especially in the old first tour, you go up to the briefing room, and the padre would hand you an egg cup full of rum, and another fellow would hand you a cup full of bottle or no, some milk drink. And my navigator didn't drink rum, so he'd collect the rum, so I'd drink one neat and pour the other in the drink, and then I was fit to tell anyone a tale.
How many trips did you do altogether?
I did 2 tours, 53. I flunked another 3 in, but 50 was two. The first tour was 30 trips, the second was 20.
Both with 460? Or?
First with 460. Oh, well, I started off with 51 Squadron first, then the 460, and I did the second tour, 467, another Australian squadron.
You got promoted?
Well, I did my first tour as an NCO, and I was Litchfield as a warrant officer instructor when my commission came through, and it was a bit fortunate that, for me anyhow, that I was a pretty experienced instructor and there was no higher ranking fellows around the place. So when I went away to get my uniform, the flight commander told me to bring one back with PO stripes and another back with flight lieutenant stripes on. And I was only back a short while when he got me, promoted me to his flight commander. This was Billy Brill. You might have heard of him somewhere along the line, Arthur Doubleday's friend.
So you were a squadron leader?
Pardon?
So you were a squadron leader?
I was a flight lieutenant. He was a squadron leader, he was the CO. But Arthur Doubleday and Billy and I were called up together. Did the first training together on the elementary place, but they got a month in front of me after that because I was held back a month there. And they were always a month in front of me then. But we all finished up in the same squadron, finished up the same OTU, and I finished up doing the same tour back on the same squadron as Brill again when he was wing commander.
Well, what were the good times for you?
I'll leave in London.
What did you get up to?
Well, you could always guarantee that there's going to be a lot of friends down there, and if there weren't old friends, there was new friends to be made. So when you got down, there was a gang of us, and I think it was just let steam off. We'd live in either the Regents or Strand Palace Hotel for the 6 days, and get up in the morning and meet at the cottages and drink and carry on like a lot of fools all day long. Not.
Did you go to the windmill?
Pardon?
Did you go to the windmill?
No, I never. The only time I'd ever been near the windmill was some fellow had taken me there. It was during the day when nothing was on to meet. There was a bar not far from there, and it was all full of these windmill girls. And I went there one time and saw a lot of the windmill girls. But I never went to very many pictures over their shows because the queues were too long, and I just spent my time. I'm a bit ashamed of it, probably a wasted life, but the drinking and carrying on chasing girls was be the whole part of my life. I didn't even bother about food very much.
Girls were pretty easy to get for.
Oh, they were nice, the English girls. Comfort for the servicemen.
Paddy, did it ever worry you about what was happening to the people on the ground that you were bombing?
No. I thought about that for a while, but I had some senior officers used to talk about it, that I always felt that they knew more than they said what was going on in Germany. You can't go feeling sorry for your enemy, even though you might be killing the women and children and so forth like that, because what the hell are they doing over outside, trying to do just as bad? And you've got to win the war somehow, and the quicker you do it, the better. But I did have feelings, but I can remember one time when, this was on the second tour, when we were flying low over Germany, and the tail gunner opens on someone that he saw on a bicycle, and I kicked up a heck of a row about it, because to me he wasn't a soldier. But it's early in the war, I might have felt different about it. But at that time I was a bit mad that he wanted to shoot some old bloke on a bicycle. But I can try to honestly say that while I was over Germany, I was too worried about myself, and when I got back I was too worried to enjoy myself, so I didn't have time to think about them, I suppose.
What's the trip that you remember most, 69 miles?
Well, there was a couple of them. One to Berlin that I spoke about getting into all the strife on that we had to fly across the Baltic and come down near Essen, near Stettin, to come in behind Berlin and come from the rear, more or less. And I've never had a trip that they tormented me so much the whole way. I just wondered none of us were hit. The plane was full of holes, and it was a hell of a strife. And the navigator got ill, and it was just a nightmare. And I've had a few others around the place when they dropped the incendiaries on me and set fire to the aircraft, filled it full of smoke, and the crew all raced down to put it out, and I couldn't talk to anyone. One, I thought they'd all bailed out, and I didn't know what to do with it to bail out myself. And the only thing I was thinking of was to get as far away from the target as possible. And eventually some of the smoke started to clear, and the one that was inside the aircraft had burnt its way through, and it cleared all up, and they'd cleaned it up. And all come back and were all very quiet and flew home.
Do you ever have any bad times with weather?
Pardon?
Do you ever have any bad times with weather?
Yes, a few times bad weather, and on the second tour I did one in the middle of France somewhere, and the weather was terrible there. A mosquito broke up through it, the weather conditions, and I'd been iced up a couple of times, not very badly. I had a reasonable two tours through, compared with some of the stories that I hear from some others, and you read these books about it, some terrible things that happened to them, but I had a fairly good trip.
When did you come back to Australia?
Pardon?
When did you come back to Australia?
I got back here in January 1946. I left in 41 sometime, about March, April, May. I think April 41. Got back in January 46.
How did you feel when you got back?
Well, everything had changed quite a lot. I can remember when we got off the boat in Fremantle. I'd come from the eastern states, but we were allowed off the boat last. And when we walked up the street, one of the chaps said to us to go into a shop and ask the girl for something we knew she didn't have in the shop, to hear her speak, because we hadn't heard our Australian girls for years, and the girls said, "We ain't got any," or something. It was a raspy voice. But I think it was a bit wrong. We went up to Perth then and played around a bit. But I stayed in the Air Force after the war, so that I didn't have to battle with Civvy Street or anything like that when I came back. I saw my relatives. I had brothers and aunts and uncles, but no very close relatives, except one brother. And we all went our own ways, and I was happy to get back, I think.
Do you feel a bit of a sense of coming down from having all that adrenaline pumping?
Yeah, well, see, with our behaviour over there, it wasn't the best. We were delinquents. We acted like delinquents in a lot of cases, the mess parties and all over the place. Well, when we came back here, it was a real letdown. And I can remember by stopping in the Air Force that a lot of the fellows that stayed in with us from England were still trying to carry on like rat bags, letting us steam off, or whatever it was we were trying to do. And we didn't get on very well with the people that are out here. And I remember Point Cook, that's the main place. And I can remember turning up there for a course very early. I was one of the first to arrive, and I was sitting in the anteroom, and in the anteroom all these old flight lieutenants and squadron leaders and goodness knows what ground crew fellows all sitting there reading papers and quiet as lambs, when another fellow turned up in the door, one of my mates, and he opened the door and he looked in and he let out a yell and he said, "So this is where all the dead had been propped up behind papers." And papers went down, and we got into quite a lot of trouble there, but it took a while for us to settle down. I don't know, it might have been a problem in Civvy Street too for some of them. I've heard some of them mention it in Perth here, that they'd meet at certain hotels at a loose end, wondering what to do.
There was a good deal of bad feeling, wasn't there, inside the airforce between...
There was. Between, if you had the overseas campaign medals, the English campaign medals, or I mean European ones, you weren't liked by the fellows out here, and it took quite a while to get them organised. I can remember when I started flying with them first, I had a little bit of pull to get a posting back to flying, and when I arrived there, the CO said, "I don't know why you've arrived here, because we're full." He said, "You might get a second pilot trip now and again." Well, I think it was about 3 days later he called me and he said, "Have you got pull, have you?" And I said, "No." I said, "Why?" He said, "You're posted to take this crew because the captain's been posted away." And they were all boys that had flown in the Pacific or trained out here towards the end of the war. And they wouldn't talk to me. I'd take them on the aircraft and they'd do their duties. When they came down, none of them would drink with me in the bar or anything, so I thought, I'll fix you fellas up. And the old, I get mixed up with the Lincolns, standing in the sun in Queensland, the perspex on the top get a bit crazed and brittle. I didn't know that at the time. So I took them across to an old abandoned aerodrome, and I started to first of all do corkscrews like we did during the war, which they'd never done. They'd flown straight and level blokes, and then I started swooping down and tearing it up. And one of them, when I was pulling it up real hard, putting plenty of G's on the perspex on the top, the whole roof flew out. Navigators, papers and everything went, and when they got on the ground I said, "Every time you blokes come with me and you don't talk to me, I'm going to treat you like that." And we became the brightest of friends. We did a lot of good trips all over the place. But it was a long and hard road to hoe at that dissension. You've heard about it, I guess.
So what are your reflections on the war now, on the experience of the nation?
Well, a reflection on it's a bloody awful thing to have to happen, because as you grow older, we've been to a funeral this morning of one of our fellows at Bomber Command. How useless it was. You look at photographs of your course members and you see the 44 bright young fellows on it, and you look on the back and you find out that over half of them are dead, and a lot of them dead within a year. And you think, how useless. Who caused it? Why do we have to go and fight it? And that's why I'm not a pacifist altogether, but I hope that they keep away from war in my lifetime, your lifetime, and our kids' lifetime forever and a day if possible, because it seemed to be a useless thing. What do we gain out of it? The freedom from Germany, from Hitler, that's about all, really, isn't it?
What are the saddest times?
Pardon?
What are the saddest moments, do you think, then?
Well, as far as our friends and comrades being killed, when they were shot down over Germany or didn't turn up after a trip, you'd hear probably that night or the next morning, so-and-so is missing, so-and-so is missing. You didn't feel as if it was final. You were thinking he could be walking around Germany. Often you'd say, "Oh, he'd be like that bloke, you couldn't kill him by an axe." You're walking around Germany or a prisoner of war or something like that, so it wasn't final. And by the time you'd read it in the casualty list that he was missing or that he was dead, definite, well, it was too late then to feel too much about it. But if there was a plane crashed around your aerodrome with fellows you're talking with that morning, having breakfast with or something like that, thinking, boom, they're in, and death is definite. It cast a whole gloom on the place. You'd have a station with the whole squadron, we were all gloomy and upset about it, because the death was right close and definite. It was there, not just something that's someone's just missing. So I think you made good friends with a lot of fellows and then see them go. Like a fellow I trained with, we did our first tours in separate stations, but finished up at the same OTO as instructors. He goes back to 460 and gets blown up in the air above the aerodrome. And you know he's gone, you've been a good mate, you've met him, one of the first boys you met when you went into Bradfield Park. Then you meet him again and work with him for quite a while again. And then all of a sudden, you know he's definitely blown up.
Going to the other extreme, what are the things that you remember with a smile?
Oh, no. There's a lot of things to smile about over there that, you know, when we're shooting lines to one another and carrying on, I can't even place anything really out of the way. Really?
Any particular characters sticking in?
Oh, many of them. There's a lot of funny boys amongst the crews of the fellows, but a little bloke, Colonel Knox, he and I used to kick around quite a bit, and he was a character in his own rights. He finished up as a warrant officer with a DFC and bar, or either DFC and DFM, but I know he's 2 decorations. And his CO, who used to fly with on the second tour, used to say that he'd like to lock him up and only let him out for operations, because he's a damn nuisance otherwise, but one of the best operational gunners he'd ever seen. And he lives down Esperance somewhere as Colonel Knox. He's a funny little boy.
Do you think Australians have particular qualities as aircrew?
No, I suppose we're pretty good, but we always tell the Poms we are, but I don't think there's any difference between the RAF boys and ourselves, really, because there was a lot of brave and good men amongst them, and there's a lot of brave and good men amongst our lot too, but I don't think there's any difference between the two.
Were you ever on an RAF squadron?
Yes, when the first squadron I went on to was, it wasn't a fully RAF, it was an RAF squadron, 51 squadron, but they had quite a few New Zealanders, including 2 Maoris, and a few were Australians, 4 or 5 of us, but I was with them for those 3 trips on the Whittleys. And one of the Maori boys, Johnny Poey, he was eventually shot down and was a prisoner of war, and he was one that was shot by the Germans in the Great Escape. Johnny Poey, he's a nice bloke too. And then I was for a short time, just time enough to do 3 quick trips at 35 Squadron, which is a full RAF squadron. So I suppose I spent about 6 months in that break-up periods of Whitley's going out and the Halifaxes, and then before I was posted to get my crew on RAF squadron, and enjoyed them. When I went to Litchfield to get this crew, and there's a full Australian OTU, and I walked into the mess, and I could hear all these Australian voices, I thought I was home again. And they did, because the Australian that kept with their own team all the time, I'd never expected as I did, because I was the sole Australian. I used to never kick around with the Australians on the squadron I was on. There was 2 or 3 there, I forget how many, and on the Halifax squadron there's only 1. And I didn't see him very much. So I'd say from when I went over there to train, I trained with Canadians, made friends with Canadians, so to be about 6, 7 months that I was never with many Australians, and all of a sudden I went to this OTU. And it was a bit strange for a second to hear the voices that you hadn't heard before. You hear, you know, the Cockneys and the Scotch and the Irish and everyone else, and all of a sudden hear a pack of Australians.
Do you get any views about the relative merits of the mixed crews?
Well, I don't think there'd be much difference. I think we all flew together pretty well, that I know of. I had RAF blokes in my crew. The second tour, I had a big old English policeman as my flight engineer. Well, they're your second kick, they're your right-hand man, and he was a nice big fella. I don't think really. I was a little mad when I went back to the OTU and heard the stories about the Australians with their kangaroo farms and all things like that, because I'd become a bit anglicised, I think, by the time I'd been there. And then all of a sudden go and hear these yarns, because I couldn't stomach that sort of business. And but otherwise, I think that the crews could fly pretty well together.
Is there any last thing you'd like to say?
Not really.
You're telling me you talked about flying over Berlin to
I bring this up all the time, and I think it's this day and age with the Gallaghers, you can cut that out if you like, and all those sort of people if you ever put it in, but going on strike for better pay, or going on strike for danger money, or going on strike for anything. When you consider that when I was doing my first tour as a sergeant pilot, I was getting 12 shillings a day. Now, when you're in the services, you're working for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you go to Berlin, it takes 8 hours to get to Berlin and back, approximately. That's a quarter of a day, quarter of your 12 bob, that's 3 shillings. So you went to Berlin for 3 shillings, there and back, been shot at by everything around the place, no danger money, no one to look after you, no one to worry about you. So, what the heck?
I believe the RAF used to put the obligation the other way. You sort of say, like if you manage to survive 5, you pay for your training, and
yeah.
you go and get the job.
Yeah. I heard it was less than that at one stage. I thought it was 2.5. But 2.5 yeah, 2.5 and you'd paid for your training. Well, I keep thinking after that I should have only done a half of one, because when I went on ops, I was a second pilot certainly, but I only had 169 hours on, and I was training fellas to go on ops, and they still had to go through further training after me, and they'd have 300, 400, 500 hours in, or 500 hours, some of them. So they got me pretty cheap, didn't spend much on me.
169, isn't it?
And that, off the cuff, that young fellow that, or the fellow we buried today, he was shot down on his first trip.
Yeah, that happened quite a bit. All right, thanks, Paddy.
Thank you.